If we'd been having this conversation back in series 4 or 5, I'd be saying keep it as simple as possible.
You'd be saying, keep it as simple as possible.
There's one thing I want to pick you up on.
Okay.
You were talking about Frostbite and the £500 budget, and you brought up the fact that Chaos 2 only cost £250.
Have I been spreading lies?
No, you've been spreading truth, but there's something you've missed here.
Okay.
That was £250 in 1997. So I've gone away and I've worked out how to do the inflation adjustment from 1997 to now, which puts Chaos 2 at about £430, which is a far more reasonable number.
Wow, yeah, that is... Good Lord, inflation has gone up. Or, like, yeah, inflation, man.
That's how inflation works. If it went down, it'd be deflation.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Oh, I'm an idiot. But that's crazy. That went up. That was a bigger number than I was expecting. When you said inflation, I was expecting maybe 300 and something. They're quite comparable then, actually, aren't they, in price?
They really are, in that one sense.
Yeah, they're comparable in price, in no other regard. We do have one other bit of follow-up that's not directly from last episode, or indeed, it must be from the episode before. So just before we recorded last episode, we went live with the podcast and we posted it to Reddit, the Robot Wars subreddit, and since then people have, much to my surprise, listened to it. And much more to my surprise, they fed back as well. People have said things. By people, I mean Sam from the concussion team. So we talked about there was seemed to be 2 house robot things triggered by Thor in that fight, which seemed a bit odd and a bit out of line with the rules that we were given to understand. And Sam's clarified what's happened here. I'm going to go and just let me read it.
Did you not have it open already?
I've got it open already, but what I can't do is talk to you and also parse this comment to try and summarise it sensibly. So I need to stop and read it, and then
basically you can't do the lowest level of multitasking.
Right, you talk while reading something and make sense of that.
That's literally what I'm doing the whole time when I'm looking at my notes.
Yeah, but you're not parsing complicated sentences. Just shut up.
I'll just point out that I have become I haven't even become. You know what? There's no analysis of this. I'm just going to give it to you. On Chrome, if I type in www.r, it's immediately coming up the Robot Wars subreddit. It is my most visited thing.
That is a bit ridiculous. Right then, so... In summary of Sam's comment, there's the pit release button, as I've suspected but never really voiced, is not a button. Obviously, it kind of makes sense. It's not. It's just a tire attached to the wall with some operator watching it, who actually triggers who actually triggers what's going to happen. At some point, Thor just sort of hit it. And obviously nothing happened because nothing should have happened. But then a bit later on after that, Matilda came to try and free Concussion. And in the edit, they sort of spliced things together a little bit to make it look like Thor released Matilda and stuff like that. So that's why Matilda went straight for Concussion with all that speed. I think the goal there was to try and get Concussion out of being stuck in the pit thing there, which is roughly what we thought. So that's that. That's the only other bit of follow-up we really have, I think.
I'm not sure if I was really happy to hear that or not, because I consider myself to be quite well versed in the weirdness of TV land, but I still really want to believe it's an actual button. The idea of some sort of intern just sat there going, oh, they pressed the button, I'll press the button. It doesn't quite have the glamour.
I know what you mean, but I don't think I've ever believed that was going to be a button. It's just, especially not if it's a rule of you can only hit it once, because there's no way you can enforce that unless it's not a button and someone is watching it, you know?
What if it's a sentient button? That's definitely a thing, right?
That's how the uprising begins. We can have sentient buttons, and then lifts will go mad, take over the world.
Have you read much Hitchhiker's Guide?
I've read, I believe, all of the books.
There is one of those books, I can't quite remember which, where a reasonably integral plot point is that lifts have been developed to see very slightly into the future so that they can preempt people's lift needs. We need a button that preempts being pressed.
That'd be so weird.
So one thing that's still not entirely clear is how the randomization works. Because presumably that crew member who hits a button is sparking off some kind of process that randomizes it, I would hope.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine it's just a button they're hitting, and then some computer program doing some very complicated algorithms will pick between two things.
Or is even that too complex? Could it be that that crew member is literally sat there with an order of first hit, pit, second hit, pit, third hit, Roadhouse Robot, and whatever?
It could be anything. I don't know. To be honest, as long as it's not the person watching it who's making a decision, then I think it's fine. Anything other than that is all right in my book, really.
What I want is for that person to see it get hit, toss a coin, wait for it to land, and then hit it.
So I think you mentioned, certainly in a conversation we've had, but possibly even a recorded one, about the breakdown of which direction it went over the course of the series. I think this was in our unreleased episode 0 test recording that we had this conversation. And you mentioned that it seemed to be pretty much exactly 66 and 34%.
I think I went as far as saying 66.6 and 33.3. I think I went that precise. But yeah, someone out there, again, on the subreddit I seem to recall, went through and properly recorded the ratio and found it was roughly that. And the reason we believe for that is there was originally meant to be a third option called Fog of War, which sounds like it would probably have been awful.
Yes, it would have been.
So some kind of release of CO2 either into the arena or in front of the drivers or whatever to obscure the battlefield, which just sounds atrocious.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad that did get dropped.
But if the fact that that's the case suggests that it's not someone making a decision, and it's probably not someone flipping a coin. It's going to be some computer program that's been quickly modified to just pick a different option or something. I don't know. Anyway, probably not that important.
It's probably not that interesting either, really. But here we are, talking about it anyway. But of course, the real takeaway from this, again, is how many people are actually going to be annoyed? How many viewers are going to be put off by them just saying, yeah, this is what happened? Is the truth really that onerous?
I think the thing is, it's hard to tell that story in television without someone explaining it. Like, if trying to express the fact that Matilda's gone to free it either involves Jonathan Pierce being really on the ball and explaining it, which seems
fat chance.
Which seems unlikely to me, or they'd have to do that in post and hope that he sounds as if he's still commentating live, or...
What? I'm 99% certain that Jonathan Pierce does not do the commentary live.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, he'd have to sort of... I feel like he's sort of reacting to what he's seeing, like a recorded version of it, but
I'm not convinced. I think there are times where he foreshadows things a little too well.
Well, I don't know. Point is, either he's got to explain what's going on, which doesn't seem like that's... If nothing else, it wouldn't fit in, I don't think. Or they've got to try and tell that story purely with cinematography, which seems like a tall order given the current camera work that they have. So yeah, I can see why they would edit that just to look like it was another rogue house robot, because that's an easy and obvious thing to explain than trying to sort of say, oh, they're stuck, we're going to get Matilda out to go and try and free them. And it's just more entertaining as well, I think. Or the hope was that it would be more entertaining.
And then people like us come along and ruin the illusion.
Yep, and come along and complain about it, ruin everything.
The whole show's going to get pulled now.
I hope not.
Oh, imagine. I'm not saying we're anywhere near that happening, but imagine if we were responsible for that.
6-episode podcast run and then no more. We'd have to find something else to talk about.
It's okay, we'll go back through the old series.
Oh yeah, either old series or something else entirely.
We'll just start making our own ones out of Lego and fighting those and then doing punditry on it.
Melee 1. In this melee, we have Apollo, we have Rusty, we have Ms. Nightshade, and Coyote. We start with Apollo.
Yeah, we can start with the easy one, can't we? The reigning champion.
Yeah. There's not a lot to say about them, though. They've got a very effective flipping robot that they've made slightly more powerful this year. And like I said, reigning champion. So we know it's an effective robot. We know it can win. So I don't know what else to say.
It's one of those things where they've made some upgrades, but not the impressive upgrades. So they've got a slightly bigger and more powerful RAM on it. They've got new speed controllers because they got a sponsor for those. So why not? And that's kind of it. It's a really good flipper.
It is. It is a very good flipper. I would argue not quite as good as Eruption. I prefer Eruption.
Thing is, with Apollo and Eruption, you've got slightly different styles of flipper.
Yeah.
So Apollo is built to have a very long flipping arm, which in theory should translate to getting bigger, higher flips. Eruption is that much more compact design.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how well you can really compare flippers except by how high do they flip. That's the only sort of metric for a flipper. Apart from that, it's just the usual robot stuff of can it take some hits? And I think they both can.
I guess that's sort of like the only thing you can measure, but I really like Eruption. I like the fact that it's more compact. It's much more my kind of style of robot, and I think the fact that Michael is such a good driver has a big impact on that as well.
Apollo do claim to be the most powerful flipper in the UK, but as we've kind of gone over a few times, we're not really sure if that means anything, are we?
It's such a hard thing to measure. I was reading something actually on the subreddit about measuring the force of the clamping robots or the piercing robots with pins and stuff. And people measure the force from so many different positions. Like you can measure it right next to where the pivot is. You could measure the pressure at the tip. You could measure the pressure all over the place. Some people with like the jaws that clamp from both directions would take the clamping force or like the pressure from one claw and then double that number because there's two, which doesn't really work. But so there's all kinds of weird stuff, and I wonder what kinds of crazy stuff happens in the world of flippers as well. Like with at what point do you measure this force? You know, is it the force right at the tip? Is it the force nearer the hinge? Is it, you know, an impulse force? Is it sustained force? All kinds of just madness.
Basically, if you make enough measurements, one of them will be better than everyone else's.
You just keep measuring from different points until you get the biggest number, and then you tell the BBC that.
And then they probably add a bit more just because it sounds better. So that's all we have to say on Apollo.
Well, I mean, setting the robot aside, the two guys that were here, I do like them. They seem like really nice guys as well.
Yeah, I really loved their approach last series of trying to be entertainers. This series, I think I appreciated that slightly less. But I think that's got more to do with the episode they're in than anything else. Because last time out, they had the chance to showboat a bit because they were smashing everything. Whereas this time, of course, they've got a bit more to worry about.
Yeah, they had a much harder time of being entertaining and light-hearted this year. I still think they did a great job of that, but it's, a much harder episode to pull that off in.
I think they showed a catastrophic lack of banter in their interview with the can't abide comment. That's about as low grade as it gets. I say some bad stuff, most of which fortunately gets edited out, but that was terrible.
It's unfortunate that joke didn't land.
There's nothing to land. It was terrible.
It was terrible. It's a shame it didn't land. It's also, I think, a bit of a shame that the BBC didn't re-record that. Because it just
Unless
fell...
they had, and that was the best take.
I hope not. But that fell so flat.
They also dabbed at one point, which made me instantly want them to lose.
They dab? They did like a weird arm thing. I wasn't sure if it was...
It was an attempt at a dab, I think.
I don't think they dabbed. I think they did like the sort of like arms over their head pointing thing, but that's not a dab.
Ooh, controversy. We've manufactured some early controversy.
I hope that we spend like an hour next time talking about the definition of dab.
This is all the follow-up next time round. There's going to be comment after comment.
From all two of our listeners.
Hey, we had someone asking for episode 4 today. Doesn't get any bigger than that.
Should we move on to Rusty?
We should definitely move on to Rusty.
Rusty, the flipper. So I was just gonna quickly rehash some stuff from earlier episodes. Before we go talk about the actual robot. They've come on and they've said they've never even driven it. Never, like, that takes untested to a whole new level. Never even driven it. What the hell, man? Like, what? Why are the BBC letting this on? What's going on? Why? Why would you compete with a robot you've never driven even? What? How does that work? How do you even know it's going to move? Insane. I don't understand. It annoys me. Legitimate sporting competition. And you got like imagine watching a game of football where one team had never even played the game before. I mean, what the hell? It's ridiculous. There's untested weaponry because the weaponry is too dangerous. That's one thing. But undriven is just insane. A whole new level of stupid.
I'm guessing they finished it very late, very close to the deadline. That's the only assumption I can make with that. Because that is awful.
It is awful. I mean, but I was looking at the application form and I feel like you've got to know an awful lot about your robot. And I feel like how long is it between the application forms being sort of submitted and the deadline for that and then actually starting to record?
I don't know an exact number, but the consensus seems to be not long enough. Bear in mind that quite a lot of applications are made literally with CAD only.
Oh my goodness me.
And something that we see a lot is that quite a lot of the reserve robots are ones from the live tour, so ones that already exist. They're a safe thing for the BBC to accept. You know they're going to be there, you know they're going to work. Whereas quite a lot of the new teams specifically, you know, the teams that are coming in with their first heavyweight, I would imagine a lot of those have applied with a design and then built it once they had confirmation they were in. And with this being a university team who aren't going to be doing this on a big budget and aren't necessarily going to want to put that money and time in without that guarantee of being on the show, I would imagine they're in that group of, we didn't start building this until we were accepted. Although, well, actually, it is based off of an old live tour robot. So, yeah. I'm not sure I agree with myself anymore because I've just spotted that on my notes.
What this is the first of basically 6 robots that are here purely to try and make Apollo and Carbide look good, is what it feels like. Like looking through the robots in this entire heat, there's potential from a few of them to be quite good, but it feels an awful lot like there's just some lesser robots here with the 2 favourites. It's weird.
There's a phrase in lots of fighting sports, so boxing, kickboxing, MMA, and that's a tomato can, which is basically an opponent that is selected to boost the numbers of a good fighter. So if there's some up-and-coming fighter, they like to be able to say, oh, I've won this many and never lost. So they will take on easy fights to boost that figure. This whole episode is essentially tomato cans. There's 2 in there that I think in other heats would have a good chance. I think they're very good designs and very good builds. And there's 4 which definitely aren't. You know, they are just fodder.
I wonder if we're going to agree on the robots far more than I thought we would.
In a first on the podcast.
That makes me nervous.
I mean, Rusty, I like the philosophy behind it. The idea is that they have built it for reliability. They've made it simple. They've made it easy to repair. So in that respect, it's a good idea. And again, put it in another heat. Maybe it's got a slight chance. It's better than the Frostbites of this world, which basically puts it as every robot except Frostbite. It's not the highest quality internals, but, you know, some of the materials they're using are decent. It's a legitimate attempt at a fighting robot.
Yeah, it's. I mean, my biggest problem with it is it's never even been driven. But other than that, like, it looks like a fairly middle of the road budget robot, and that's fine. And yeah, in any other heat, I'm sure it would do better. But in this one, it's a
very standard design. I said low poly Chaos 2 as a joke, but it is the sort of thing that we saw a lot around Series 3, Series 4, because it's an easy design to build. 2 big drive wheels on either side, scoop that goes down to the ground, body, and that's it.
Yep, cool.
This brings us on to Miss Nightshade.
a spike bot, which I've got in quotes, because I feel like this is the only robot that's ever been called a spike bot before.
Because none of them qualify as hammers. I know that you have a problem with certain types of battery.
Yeah.
12-volt lead-acid batteries in Miss Nightshade.
That's not even my biggest problem with this robot.
The thing is, when I first saw a picture of it, I was excited. When I went on the Robot Wars website, as soon as the lineup was announced, I looked through and I went, that is a thing I want to see working. Emphasis on the working.
Yeah.
They claim that it can escape the pit, but they also claimed it was unflippable. So what do they know about their own robot? In fact, I can answer that question. Nothing, 'cause this is also untested.
But, like, untested because this is my biggest problem with it. It's untested, but their reason for it being untested, apparently, like, according to what they said on the show, was we wanted it to be a surprise for us as well.
That's a post hoc justification of mistakes that have already been made.
Just the notion of that, of like, oh, we're going to enter a robot that we know nothing about because we think it'll be funny, just angers me to the core. Because, like, the part of me that wants to treat this as a legitimate sporting competition, as something to be taken seriously, it's just, how can that be? How can you have, it's like I said earlier, like, imagine a football game where one of the teams didn't know how to play football. Imagine a football game where one of the teams had never even heard of football and just thought, well, we'll go onto the pitch and see what happens. That'd be a laugh. No. Not a laugh. Silly.
Last time out, I lambasted a team for testing a weapon in an unsafe way. I feel like they could have tested this weapon reasonably safely.
I feel like that's certainly possible. Nevertheless, I think it's an interesting robot. Actually, I think it could. I would have liked to have seen it working. I think it's at the beginning of this melee, right in the first shot, with the camera seems to be very carefully avoiding having too much of Ms. Nightshade in the frame because one of the petals is already fallen down. It's not upright. It's not all up the way it should be. It's already seems to be down. So I feel like it went in. It's one of those robots that went in not really in the best of shape, unfortunately.
My understanding is that you're absolutely right. What I believe happened is that there was some kind of mishandling of the robot on the part of the production crew or whoever was getting it into the arena that damaged something. I think drive.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. I would have loved to have seen it.
It also shows a lack of robustness, though, doesn't it? Let's be honest.
Oh yeah, the whole robot is very frail, I think, and that shows when it gets flipped in the battle, and it lands on one of its petal things, and the petal kind of crumples a bit. It's not the world's most robust thing. I'm dubious about whether or not it can get out of the pit. I think it could probably hold itself above the pit, but once there, it can't move. So like, what's it going to do? I don't know. It would have been interesting to see it work. I think this is one of those things where if it were more robust, I think there's probably a surprising amount of power in the hammery bits. I think there could be a surprising amount of power because it's always surprising when you think about Stinger how much damage that could do, or any full body spinner. You think that surely that can't do anything, but there's a surprising amount in there, and I think there could be a surprising amount inside something like Ms. Nightshade. Maybe not this particular robot, but something like that.
The difference between the design of something like Stinger and this is that in Stinger, all of the weight that wasn't going going towards drive and armour was going towards a single weapon. In this, they're splitting that weight across 8 weapons.
Yeah,
That's not a way of getting any single effective hit.
It's not a perfect design by any means.
But then again, it isn't one that's coming out and trying to win it. It's one that's coming out to try something new, and that's why I was drawn to it in the first place. And if they come back with a Miss Nightshade 2, I will welcome it with open arms.
I don't know, man. I'm still fighting this thing internally of robots that clearly can't win. And how I feel about them.
In a situation where every robot can win, not every robot can win.
Well,
There's always going to be better and worse.
I know, but
There's always going to be a sliding scale of quality.
There's a bell curve here, right? And the robots that are way off the bottom of that bell curve, they're the ones I have problems with. I don't think Miss Nightshade is quite down that far.
I would put this in definitely bottom 10, probably bottom 5 for potential to be good.
Fair enough. I would never have high hopes. I don't think this thing could ever win. I don't think, but it's definitely not the worst robot we've ever seen. It's not as bad as Jellyfish.
I was just going to ask where you put this in comparison to Jellyfish. Because I think Jellyfish is a more viable design.
I would still put Jellyfish below this. But I think that's a philosophical thing about what they were trying to achieve and how I think they failed to achieve that. And I'm going to keep coming back to this. The fact that he said that not having a background in engineering is an advantage, just that annoys me so much.
You're still angry about that, aren't you?
Honestly, I'm not happy about that. And that detracts from the whole team and the robot for me.
The best thing is, and this is a message to the listeners, what you heard was not everything that was said. There was a lot cut from that episode 1 rant.
I had the luxury of editing that episode.
I had this dilemma myself, actually, when editing episode 4, or doing the first pass edit on episode 4, in that I kind of wanted to cut bits of my rant about Frostbite, but if I did, I was losing context on things I was saying, so I've kept it all in. I'm going to regret that decision when it goes out. So I completely understand your want to cut it down.
It's hard to find that balance. Should we move on to Coyote? Coyote?
This is an English versus American issue, isn't it?
It's just it's me looking at a word and then pronouncing it how it's spelt as opposed to thinking of how the word is actually said.
So moving on to Coyote.
What I feel like Coyote is the first robot. So like I keep joking about the introduction person saying things like flipper, but nothing, not a word out of him for this one because it's got 2 weapons. And what do you say?
Ah. Grab a lift, a spinner.
He didn't do it though. There was none of that. It wasn't like because he's got like grab a lifter and then like a chainsaw. But he didn't. Nothing was said. It was just sort of like this dual weapon robot. Okay, really made me laugh.
What a cop out.
It was a cop out.
What a cop out.
It was a cop out.
I like Coyote.
I also like Coyote. It is I really like the fact it's got 2 weapons. That's something that I wish more robots did, is having multiple weapens. I don't know why, I just love the idea, but I'm glad they have to.
It's funny because I've just given the rationale against that, but I'd like Coyote for that exact reason. It just looks good. And I'm fairly sure that they acknowledge they weren't expecting the chainsaw to do a great deal, but it looked good.
I think they very quickly learnt why Matilda doesn't have a chainsaw anymore as well.
It didn't exactly. It wasn't robust, was it?
No, completely ineffective, and very quickly broke. But cool. I want more robots to have 2 weapons. I want to see that happen more. And if you can get 2 effective weapons, even better.
I was expecting you, in a sense, to be looking at this as kind of form over function. I was expecting you to not like it on those grounds.
I actually quite like the aesthetic of this. It's just on the it's just on the right side of not trying too hard. I think it didn't take much to take the function of that robot and then make it look a little bit like what it looks like. I don't think that was like unlike Foxic, which is just massively designed to look like what it looks like. This feels like it's a form that follows its function much more naturally. And it's just got quite just the right kind of aesthetic about being like a scrapyardy type thing pulled together. I don't know. I like it. I can't quite put my finger on why, but I do like it.
I think for me, it's evocative of the sort of first round of designs for the House robots. It's got that slightly dirty look, and it's also completely designed around that main weapon. That main weapon, the grabber, is almost half of the weight. So that has been the focus of the design, and everything else has kind of fitted in around it. And that for me is the way to go with design.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like it's very much a case of form that's followed function, which I really like.
I think you could argue for it being form follows function and function follows form. But without knowing what their design process was, it's kind of hard to tell. But the end result looks good and works, so who's complaining?
Yeah, and this is one of those robots where I think if it were in any other heat, it would do a lot better than it did. I think it's a shame they were sort of lumped in this one, really. But a good robot. I really want them to come back. I really want to see them again.
It's hard to know whether to class this as a new team or not, because I would say that this melee is the grand champion against 3 newcomers. And with Rusty and Miss Nightshade, that's hard to argue. Coyote do have experience in the form of Jamie, who was part of Team PP3D last series. But that is literally the only experienced opponent for Apollo in this whole melee. It's
not quite right, is it?
It's illegitimate sporting competition is what it is. But I suppose we better try and describe that fight.
There's not much to say. I mean, Apollo just sort of wiped the floor with all of them, really. It was, my notes are really thin. It was just quite uneventful, just sort of Apollo going around and flipping people a bit, and that was about it, really.
What I found really interesting was that Rusty broke when flipped.
Oh yeah, the front wedge thing came right off, didn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't even when it hit the ground. It was in midair it was coming off. The back panel coming off on landing, I can almost give them.
But yeah, like the front sweep. I mean, what would happen if they'd have actually got a flip in? Would the flipper have just gone and nothing happened because it broke?
It's an untethered projectile weapon. It shouldn't have passed check. Tech check. I can't do those words. It shouldn't have passed tech check, is what I was trying to say. Miss Nightshade, of course, doesn't really move, manages to flail around a little bit, which looks kind of good.
What's your Reddit flair? Is it like ineffectual
flails ineffectually?
Yeah, it cracks me up.
I forgot that was how you must know that I'd like Miss Nightshade.
Yeah.
It's just, there's nothing to say. The only really amusing bit was when one of Miss Nightshade's arms got stuck on Dead Metal, and Dead Metal's just trailing it around and spinning wildly to try and get rid of it.
Get rid of it. That I think the winners I'm a bit dubious about who won. Maybe I'm.
Well, Apollo clearly won. Are you thinking more about who went through?
So yeah, the winner was clearly Apollo, and then I gotta clam up every time I have to say this word now. Then Coyote. No, not happy with it either. Whatever. Coyote also went through, and I've got a note here. Why Coyote and not Rusty? Because Rusty was mobile at the end as well. There were like 3 mobile robots, but then was Rusty immobile for long enough? Did it get counted out, or was it like an implicit judge's decision that then wasn't televised? I don't know what happened there. It just seemed a bit odd to me, but then maybe I'm just clutching at straws. Who knows? It doesn't matter really.
Unfortunately with this, because I've only seen an edited version of the fight, I can't say. What I will say is that I'm very glad it wasn't Rusty, because in terms of robots to go through to face Carbide, the one that can't survive being lifted into the air is not my first pick.
The correct 2 went through, but it just seemed a bit odd, but not really important.
And that was the melee. Moving on to melee 2, where we have Crackers and Smash, Carbide, Mega Mouse, and Trolley Rage.
In this heat, or in this round, we have 3 interesting robots.
I see what you've done there.
You've cut and done.
You clever man, you.
Should we start with 2 of them?
We shall, yes.
Crackers and Smashed, dubious claim to being a clusterbot, but 2 robots.
I was ridiculously excited when I first saw them, because I think this isn't the first time we've had effective clusterbots, because Gemini did quite well on their first or second outing. But certainly in the new series, it's not something we've seen anyone attempt.
No, just to sort of quickly touch on like what makes a clusterbot. It seems that the rules of Robot Wars is just 2 robots counts as a clusterbot. But I much prefer Gemini's approach, because Gemini came out as 1 robot and then split into 2. I mean, it was a very tenuous link to make it 1 robot, but it did operate as 1 unit until the fight started, and then they'd split apart and do stuff.
It's just a theatrical formality though, isn't it?
I appreciate that theatre. I think that's worth doing. Crackers and Smash kind of breaks the illusion of clusterbot. When you think of a clusterbot, you sort of expect it to all start as 1 thing. In my mind, anyway, and this kind of breaks that a little bit for me. But there you go, it is what it is. Minor nitpicking aside, it's a great robot.
It's a very clever use of the rules. They've done the weight distribution in a way that means if one's out, the other is still in. They've given more weight to the one with the damaging weapon, so the weight can go into the weapon. They've got a very experienced team of people here from the live tour and from working with lighter weight robots as well. So between that team, there's probably a good maybe 10 featherweights. Lots of them sort of quite successful ones as well. They also were meant to be in Series 8, but withdrew and were replaced by a reserve, but I don't know why.
Maybe it was more of their weird tactics.
Oh, God.
This is a very, very tactical team, and for me, they push it a little bit. But we'll come on to that later, I guess.
That's something to look forward to. Another great thing about Crackers and Smash is they're running brushless drive on both robots and doing it without blowing up.
There we go. It can be done. What's going on, Pulsar? And they're like, go and talk to these guys.
Custom-made speed controllers, to be fair, which I think was by Rory Mangles from Team Nuts, because who else do you go for? He does some great stuff in this sort of field.
Good. I'm glad. Happy for him.
You realise if we do an Outmate build, we're probably going to be buying stuff off of him, right?
That's fine. Yeah, I'm happy for him. I wish he'd put those skills into a better robot of his own, but, you know.
Aww. I love how the hatred you had for robots in episode 1 has carried through this far.
Carry on for the length of this podcast.
The anti-jellyfish and anti-nuts rhetoric is ongoing. Moving on to something that I presume you're going to finally like, in Carbide.
No, it's a rubbish robot. Shouldn't be in the competition.
It really needs more weight in that bar, and it's just unreliable. Team don't know what they're doing.
Carbide is an excellent robot.
They've come back, and this time they've got a slightly new logo.
Slightly new logo. Is that the sum of the changes for you, is it?
It's the most important upgrade. It used to go horizontally, now it runs vertically on the robot.
The thing that was interesting to me is they've got a custom-made motor for their weapon, which...
It's not going to make any difference. It's all about the art, all about the artwork. But no, massive internal upgrades.
A lot of work's gone into the inside of that thing, and it shows in being it wasn't that unreliable last time, but I feel like it's more reliable this time. But then that might also be a function of being in a heat of, generally speaking, weaker robots. So who knows?
I'm happy to argue that it's to do with having custom weapon motors and a new custom clutch.
Yeah, it's a good robot. They know what they're doing. They're proper. I want to point out, just to the Jellyfish team again, just to keep going with this. This is 2 experienced engineers, and look at what they've built. They've built one of the most formidable robots in the competition. To
be fair, this is essentially a version 3, because they had Cobalt as well in BattleBots. So this is a style of design that they're very good at making.
Yes, and, they're engineers, and they know what they're doing.
What I also find interesting, and I don't really like talking money too much, but Carbide, from what I've read, actually cost less than, for example, Crackers and Smash.
Doesn't surprise me.
I think that's partly because, the team have access to materials maybe at cheaper rates. They might have some sponsors in there. They might have access to certain machinery as well that's keeping their costs down. But it's really easy to look at this as being the sort of glitterati of Robot Wars, the big boys pumping all the money into it. And I'm not sure that's true. I think a lot of it is really good design choices and lots of experience.
Yeah.
This isn't the kind of team that's having to bring 10 weapon motor spares along. They build one and it works.
Yeah, I agree.
It's so hard doing this. Know that we've got to move on to the next 2 robots. If I may go into a quick stat attack as well with Carbide.
Yeah.
25 kilo bar, 3 second spin up.
That is ridiculously fast.
Spinners are scary enough as it is, but when you get one that spins up quickly and doesn't stop, that's when you're truly terrified.
I feel like he mentioned that the tip speed of that was like 250 miles an hour as well.
Yeah, that's a lot.
A lot of speed.
That, I believe, is at the limit of what they would even accept in BattleBots.
Oh.
Just on a sort of safety front, and I imagine that Carbide probably can't be tested in the test arena at those speeds.
Probably not, but then maybe they trust it because it's not likely to blow apart. Who knows?
I can see the logic behind that, but absolutely not. Please never do that.
Oh yeah, that's
not how that works.
That's not how that should work. Yeah.
They know what they're doing. It's fine.
But the BBC. Who knows? Who knows what they do?
Next up, we have Mega Mouse.
Meg.
Come on, this isn't even one of the hard ones.
God damn it, man! Mega Mouse has ugly welding, and that's all I have to say about it.
The best thing is, you're not wrong. Is that just to do with what it's like to weld aluminium, though? I feel like aluminium isn't a great material for welding.
I don't think it is. Not really the point, though. It's ugly welding.
I think that welding would have looked better if they made it into the head-to-heads. Because when you make it to the head-to-heads, the BBC come around and film a VT of your robot. And about 90% of that VT is you with an angle grinder making sparks shower off of your robot. Which would have given them a reason to actually grind those welds down to look a bit better.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Actually, I'm with Dara on this as well. I'm not sure about making a biting robot look a bit cute. I don't know. Mixed feelings. I think sometimes it can work, sometimes it can't.
Foxy looks cute, and that's a great robot.
Deator is great. Not necessarily cute, but great.
Yeah, Deator never looked cute so much as plain stupid. And then it went and beat Tornado once and showed everyone that it was actually pretty decent. Mega Mouse is very much a robot for the gentler environment of the live tour.
Yeah, I'm assuming they're a live touring team. I assume.
Yeah, I believe they were actually reserves for this series as well.
Yeah, because it looks like a battle-tested robot. I think part of the ugliness on the front of it is that it's not a brand new thing. It's a robot that they've used. So I've given that. But yeah, I think you're right. They make a great live tour robot, but not so much for television.
It's one of those things where I think you can design something to be cute, but you can't design something in that kind of boxy way, because that is just too spinner friendly. Whereas and I'm going to use Foxic as an example here, even though I know that it gives you more ammo than I want you to have. But Foxic is built with this kind of combat in mind. So it has extremely thick armor, and last series in particular, maybe less this series, it had the scoop on the front, which would deflect blows very well. So that, I think, hits both sides of the sort of design need. Whereas something like this, it's really good for the live tour, because it kind of self-rights without using the weapon. It tends to just roll back onto its wheels. So in that respect, the shape makes sense. But everything about it for this environment and this series, it's not going to have a nice time.
Yeah. And it didn't have a nice time.
It didn't, no. I'm also quite interested in their mini-bot, which was clearly, hey, we've got 10 kilos or so spare. Let's make a mini-bot.
I feel like there are better uses of that weight.
What, like actual armour that isn't made of aluminium?
Yeah.
But no, I really like the robot. I would quite like to have seen it go a bit further just to see what it could do as a different style of flipper. Because all the flippers we have really are wedges. And this is more of a sort of spatula style thing. So in that respect, I'd quite like to see it go further. But that was never on the cards.
Can you imagine the announcer at the beginning? Mega Mouse, Spatula Bot.
You laugh, but if you look at something like Bronco, that is pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
It's a very popular style of flipper in America.
Yeah, but Bronco is a good robot. Mega Mouse, not so much.
It's not quite Bronco, I'll grant it that. And I don't think they'd be upset to hear it either.
Oh dear. It is, however, I would say better than Trolley Rage.
So if Mega Mouse is not Bronco, then is Trolley Rage sort of not terahertz?
I think that's being way too kind to Trolley Rage.
Hey, I'm not wrong.
It is, technically speaking, not terahertz.
I think that for a build predicated on the idea of using a shopping trolley, it's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, so like, given the constraints they gave themselves, it's quite good. But again, this just comes back to, is this a serious thing the competition to be taken seriously or not? And this is one of those things where it just shouldn't be here if it's a serious competition, in my opinion.
I think what you have to bear in mind is that no robot built using a shopping trolley has ever won the championship before, so they could be the first.
I'd love to see that.
Carbide just self-destructs, and Trolley Rage walks the rest of the heat.
I mean,
once again, I believe Trolley Rage was a reserve, which maybe explains the low-budget nature a little. But they're using wheelchair motors, so it's stupid.
It feels like it's going back to the roots of Robot Wars. I remember, like, in the 90s watching Robot Wars, and basically everything was wheelchair motors or wiper motors and stuff like that. It was always that kind of stuff, whereas now it's much more fancy, custom-built or purpose-built motors for all these things. So it's quite refreshing to see all that stuff back again.
It's nostalgic in the worst way possible.
It's a nostalgic robot, especially nostalgic with an electric axe.
I'd be okay with nostalgia if it was an old team coming back with an old robot.
Yeah, that would be better.
But with this, I'm generally nice about the budget builds. I'm generally quite positive about them. But this one, maybe because of the heat it's in and the fact there's other ones like it around already, it just doesn't speak to me.
Yeah,
it's not doing anything unique. It's kind of a plunderbird-shaped shell with something that's probably worse than Series 1 Mortis's axe. It doesn't contribute anything that interests me.
Yeah, it is, I think, an unfortunate side effect of the heat that it's in. I agree. There's too much cruft in this heat. Way too much.
But we have to go with what we've got, I suppose, and Carbide certainly did that. They made the most of what they were up against.
They did. They had a nice time. They tore the side, if memory serves, off Trolley Rage, and they took the wheel off Mega Mouse.
Yeah, so with Trolley Rage, they managed to get 2 good hits to the same place. And fair play to Trolley Rage for even standing up to one of those, in a sense. So I'm not sure they would have expected that. Crackers and Smash, particularly Crackers, showed how hardy they were, and that was really good to see. It's not often we see something take that many hits for a big spinner and keep going.
They're really tough robots, and then later on, when you see one of them without the armor on, you see why. They're so tough. They're almost solid metal all the way through. It's amazing. It's just sort of like these solid lump of aluminium, I assume, or some kind of metal.
I think Smash has got an aluminium base because they want more of the weight going into the weapon, whereas Crackers, which is kind of the limpet of the group, I think is Hardox throughout, I think.
But it's just sort of like a few places, just channels cut out for the like drivetrain to go in and stuff like that. But there's no well, there's very little empty space in there. Anything that would otherwise be air has been filled with metal. Which explains why it's so freaking tough. They're also just ever so slightly shorter than Carbide's weapon height.
Which again is a very good design idea, really. Just stay out the way of the most destructive weapons.
Yeah, the problem they have, obviously, I think, that comes up later, is their weapons get hit by Carbide's bar quite a lot. But other than that, when Carbide is flailing around just above them, there's a lot of sparks flying, but I can't imagine there's much more than scrapes and cosmetic damage being done to these two robots. It's only when Carbide gets a solid hit on them that I would imagine the real damage is done.
The main damage we see really is to those corners, where after a few hits, I would imagine, it's managed to peel a little bit back, and that gives it a bite point to take off a bit more each time. But they have done very well to stand up in that, and they're the only robot that's really able to go at Carbide. If anything, the hit to Mega Mouse, I think, was a glancing blow after it had hit one of Crackers and Smash, wasn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't even at full speed at that point.
So the energy that's left in that bar after hitting them and not doing much damage was enough to rip a wheel off of Mega Mouse. So they're standing up to some big hits there. Fair play to them.
Yeah. They're good little robots.
Something I should say with Mega Mouse as well. I don't know why I care about this, but there's this sort of misconception that wheel coming off is what killed it. Those wheels on the back are not the main drive wheels. If you see it inverted, there's actually 4 smaller wheels underneath that do the bulk of the driving. The ones on the back are just there for the times where it flips and sort of ends up on its back.
What killed it then? Because when that wheel got ripped off, it looked like it was just spinning in circles on the spot.
I imagine in taking the wheel off, it also damaged the gearing or the motor.
Fair enough.
But yeah, that bugged me in the way that only I would be bugged by it.
I guess while not technically immobilised by a lack of a wheel, it was that hit that took it out.
Yeah, and it only needed one, didn't it? So with all of the ostensibly rubbish robots out of the way, we now get down to the meat of the episode. And of course, we have Apollo versus Carbide up first.
Shocker. So much for randomly selecting.
Because nothing serves the narrative better than this happening right now.
In earlier episodes, they say that these are like randomly selected, and it's randomly selected who will go first. This is not random.
In fairness, we can't completely rule out this being the result of the randomization, but it does seem convenient, doesn't it?
Is it random? Technically random, but they kept rerunning the random generating thing until they got the result they wanted.
That's like someone doing the lottery again because their numbers didn't come up. This is the one episode where I really feel there is quite a lot of interference in the competition.
Okay.
We've already spoken about the robots that are in it, and now this as well. It just feels a bit convenient, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the fact that this is what's been hyped all through the series, and the fact that we've got the reigning champion and second place in the same heat, that's ridiculous as well. What we always used to have was a proper seeding system to stop this from happening, which means that you get pretty much the best robots in the final unless something could cause an upset in its heat. It's just... I don't have words, I just have noises.
It takes away from the legitimacy of this competition. It does make it seem much more like a spectacle than a competition, which is unfortunate for people like us that want to, treat it as a serious thing and then do podcasts about it.
What they've basically done is almost guarantee that both these robots can be in the grand final, because they will have set this up. Well, I say they will. They could have set this heat up going, well, they'll definitely both make the final of the heat. Therefore, we've got one definitely going through and we've got the possibility of one being a wild card. All they seem to be doing is trying to get this rematch happening as much as possible. I realise that's quite a sort of large accusation in a way, but I feel it's fairly well grounded.
Well, they probably want to have the narrative of grudge matches and arch nemesis and all that kind of stuff. So it fits.
If you want a grudge match, you give Apollo a chance against the House Robots.
I would so love to see that. That would be so good. I'd love to see Apollo.
Well, you're in luck with this episode then, aren't you, really?
I'd also love to see Carbide against the House Robots. That'd be really interesting as well.
I suppose with the fight itself, it is a half-decent fight to begin with, if only for one piece of driving from Apollo. And I think this is probably the best piece of driving of the series, where they mistime a flip and end up on their back. And instead of racing immediately, they wait for Carbide to come at them and jump over. That was beautiful.
You pick these things up, and I love that we both see these things and draw such completely different conclusions, where you've gone down this and thought this was intentional. I just think that just happens to have been what happened. I don't think they planned that in any way.
No. As I was watching it, I was literally thinking, don't write yet, don't write yet. I preempted it happening.
Doesn't mean
Which
that they
means
did.
that I am a tactical genius on the same level as Team Apollo.
I would love to be wrong, but I think that's just when they happen to flip themselves up right again.
It looked very intentional to me, and I am more than happy to give them the benefit of the doubt. Of course, the slightly... I was going to call this a predictable outcome, but based on last series, I suppose this was a fairly 50-50 battle. But to me, it was no shock that Carbide came out on top.
No, not at all.
What I think is massively out of order is the amount of damage that the House Robots have done after this fight. This is something that we've seen more of this series, House Robots getting involved afterwards. But to do this in the first head-to-head with a robot that you know is competing for the heat, again, it serves a narrative of, ooh, Apollo has really annoyed the House Robots, they're going to get some revenge. But save that for the end, because I really think that the bulk of the damage they've had to repair is to do with Sir Killalot hoisting them up by the flipper arm as it is Carbide smacking that front.
Yeah, I mean, so Carbide did a lot of damage, and I feel that they went a little bit too far, but then that's much more justified because Apollo is the only threat there is to Carbide, really, and they're in the competition. But yeah, the House Robots stepping in and doing not insignificant damage to Apollo is a bit far as well. Not quite right.
And of course, the Apollo team are the kind that are going to take that well. So in that respect, I suppose it's less bad, but it still messes up the rest of the heat, or helps to mess it up. Having these two up against each other first also kind of messes it up. It's just, I get really frustrated. And again, it's because I think I have this slightly over-awareness of how TV works. I do get kind of riled up when I see this sort of thing happening.
I think, yeah, you definitely get more riled up about it than I do just watching it on my own. I think when I talk to you about it and it comes up, then I completely agree with you. I get equally annoyed, but I think just watching more casually doesn't bother me quite so much.
I think I'd be more okay with it if it resulted in better fights. If this episode had been a home run with great fights throughout, I wouldn't be complaining as much. But actually, the setup of this whole heat has resulted in a lot of bad fights.
Yeah, I think this is just a lot of the cascading effect of slightly bad decisions on the BBC's part all culminates in probably the weakest episode of the series, I would say.
In defence of the BBC, I do wonder what difference it would have made if the original robots that were meant to be in this heat were. Because I believe that both Trolley Rage and Mega Mouse were reserves, which means they've replaced two others. I don't have information on who the two others were. Maybe that would have evened things up a bit more.
Perhaps.
But we don't know.
All we can do is comment on what actually happened.
Yeah. Should we relax at the tech segment?
Should we go have a conversation with Sethu Vijay Akuma? So Sethu is telling us about various clever computer vision-y type things. So he's got a robot there with a rotating LiDAR system and some stereoscopic cameras. It's doing like a surveying the room, and it's got a 3D internal model of its layout, and he's talking about it in terms of sending a humanoid robot to Mars. I love how they talk about these things as well, like sending things to Mars as if it's going to happen anytime soon. Well, we're going to send
an automated mission isn't necessarily that difficult. You know, we do them already. So
so the setup for this is they want a humanoid robot to go to Mars as a precursor to humans going there, and the humanoid robot will go there, survey the area, and will help astronauts figure out where they're going to land and all that kind of stuff. And I'm dubious about this, just in terms of the effectiveness of that. I feel like if you're going to go and do a surveying mission, a rover is a far more sensible choice.
Yeah, it's going to do everything a rover can, but slightly worse.
But slightly slower. Well, the thing is, when it works, if you think about how effective humans are about getting around the place and what people can do in terms of navigating ridiculous terrain, if you could build a robot that can do that, you've got a very, very effective exploration robot. No rover will match that.
Thing is, there's something even better than humans at going over difficult terrain. Most four-legged animals. Why send a bipedal robot when you could send something more effective? You know what? Why not go for something like a spider? Why not go 8? They're pretty good at terrain as well. There's just better ways of doing it than making it look a bit more like a person.
I think that's just human.
That's just human vanity.
Human ego coming through. But what makes me laugh is they talk about this as if astronauts are going to Mars anytime soon, and people always have, like NASA and SpaceX have these bold claims about when they're going to go to Mars, and we're going to have people on Mars in the next 4 years, and the answer to whether or not that will happen is probably no. No one has the capacity to send humans to Mars. Basically, no one could even send humans into low Earth orbit, let alone Mars, you know? We haven't been to the moon in 40, 50 years, something stupid like that. It's like a long time since we've been to the moon, even. No one has the capability to send people there at the moment. NASA are working on it with a rocket that's constantly delayed. SpaceX are working on it with a rocket that's constantly delayed. Blue Origin are working on it, but they haven't announced any dates, so we don't know if they're delayed or not.
You're saying it's a long way off, but I watched a great documentary about the mission that we're going to do in 2035. There was a book about it as well. It didn't go brilliantly for the guy, but it ended quite well in the end.
Was that on the Ares mission?
Yeah, some guy called Andy Weir, I think, ran the missions. He wrote about it quite well as well. Bit sweary, but you know, it was all right. Quite a lot of potatoes. I think it might have been sponsored. A bit of product placement going on there.
Oh yeah, that documentary. I think it was sponsored by GoPro. just to touch on that. So obviously we're talking about The Martian in the film. So Matt Damon is fiddling around with these cameras that he's using to effectively vlog his experience on Mars. And these cameras are obviously GoPros. If you've visited a GoPro, this is what he's using. This is a prop they're using to do this. And I love that he's sort of fiddling around with the lens as if he's adjusting focus or something. Where GoPros are fixed focal length. There's nothing to move on them. He's just sort of like...
Well, they are now, but in 18 years' time, they might have moved on a bit.
Kept exactly the same exterior as a GoPro Hero 4, but now with variable focus.
To be fair, most filmmakers, when they want something to look futuristic, they just shove some extra LEDs on it. At least they didn't do that.
No, they just covered up the GoPro logos and that was it.
In Hollywood, I'm surprised they even did that. To bring this back to a more sensible place for a second, LiDAR in particular really interests me from a robot combat point of view, because we have seen it being used. And I think that when you have your sort of John Reed moments of wait for a good hit, something like LiDAR is possibly the answer to that. Just automate your weapon timing.
Yeah, so Chomp did this in BattleBot. I don't know how effective it was. Chomp is hard to know how effective that was because it's such an unstable robot when its axe fires anyway. So sort of hard to know if that was helping or hurting that team with that. But it's an interesting idea.
Supposedly, it literally won them a couple of fights. So there was it Bite Force, I think it is? It was the champion the series before, and it came back with a spinning bar instead of its grabber lifter thing. It's white and blue with tracks. Can't remember the name properly, but it was another robot.
Yeah, I know the one you mean,
And they supposedly tuned that LiDAR in such a way that it would hit the chain on that weapon drive, and they hit it first time. Maybe that's luck, maybe that's judgment, I don't know which, but either way, it can't be doing them any harm.
Well, I think the only problem with it is if it misfires. If it thinks it sees something and then fires when you're not expecting it, that could be a problem. But other than that, it's a cool technology. I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more robots with semi-autonomous. I'd love to see more semi-autonomous robots, which are explicitly allowed in the rule.
Absolutely, provided there's some kind of manual override to those autonomous systems, you're allowed to do it. So if it's operating on a kind of dead man's switch sort of setup, it's sort of safe to do. And it also isn't going to cost you that much weight. The hardware required to do that isn't bulky and it isn't heavy. It just requires that expertise and that kind of bravery to be the people that take that step forward.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with it is probably going to be software.
You're the man to comment on this. Tell me more.
So, I mean, anything is possible in hardware. I'm sure you could do a hardware circuit that will fire the weapon when the LiDAR thing is detecting certain things, but that's the kind of thing that you'd tackle with software. You'd have some kind of Arduino or other microcontroller in your robot that's taking sensor readings off your LiDAR, and then after, under certain conditions, you need to fire the weapon. And being good at building robots and good at building software are two slightly different things. So it may be that there's a lot of teams that want to do it, but just don't have the software know-how to, especially given that when you're programming these kind of microcontrollers, you're often working in C, which is not a nice language. I think if there were more popular microcontrollers that you could program in higher level languages like Python, or even high level compiled things like Swift or Rust or something, then I think you'd get more people doing it, because C is a nasty language to learn and use.
To me, it seems kind of inevitable that those skills are going to become part of the skill set you need to build and fight robots.
If semi-autonomous control becomes a big deal in robot fighting, then yeah, you're going to need more expertise. But then, the flip side of that is that it will become more and more accessible just because people will make pre-made packages for it, in the same way that you don't have to do crazy programming stuff. You don't have to do crazy software development to get a programmable transmitter receiver set up anymore. That's just fairly easy. You just press some buttons and it's all the software's built in such a way that you can customize it. And the first people to do semi-autonomous robots have got the problem with writing the software, but after if that does take off, then you can go onto GitHub or something and find a downloadable software package for whatever microcontroller you're using that will give you all the basic tools you need to very easily sort of wire it all up almost, and just connect a few dots and it will work.
And of course, as much as it is more work to be the team that pioneers this kind of thing, the potential reward is also very high as well. Because if you're designing this well enough that it's a big advantage, is something that no one else has got. I've really messed this up. I was kind of thinking in a kind of F1 sense of it takes time for other people to catch up with the ideas. So if you can get this working and get it working well, you've potentially got that big advantage for a little while everyone else does get up to your level.
Yeah, let's hope next year someone does it, or this year. Next series.
Series 10.
Whenever it is.
The highest numbered of all the series. That's all we know so far. Well, actually, I know quite a lot, but I'm not going to spoil any of it, so...
Well, shall we move on?
We shall. I suppose now is the time to start talking more about Crackers and Smash, because so far they've impressed us.
Yes.
And it's all going to go downhill from here.
It does take a bit of a turn for the worse.
Excellent design, excellent builds, very bad decision making. I would go as far as saying that I feel they have cheated over the course of this heat, because they have gone into first the Coyote... Well, the Coyote fight, I can kind of give them a pass on. They've not been able to fix the weapons up in time, so they've gone in with what they've got. And what they've got happened to be nothing.
At least they tried.
And they've won that fight anyway, because Coyote just had a problem. And Matilda had a fair hand in that as well.
Did she? I feel like Matilda's hit wasn't that big.
Well, she's managed to bend 10 mil Hardox, so she's obviously done quite a bit.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how these things don't often look huge on television. But yeah, that is, when you break it down and think, oh yeah, bent 10 mils of hard steel. That's, yeah, quite a lot.
You know what? Actually, I hadn't thought this through before, but it occurs to me. Often when we have Roguehouse Robot, it would be Dead Metal coming out and grabbing something for a while and not really doing anything, or it would be Shunt pushing them around and not really using the axe. I'm fairly certain that most time when Matilda has come out, she's come out tusks first. You know, the non-damaging weapon first. In this, she's come out flywheel first.
She was so aggressive. It's the most aggressive I've ever seen any house robot that's like actually in a fight. It's mad.
I hadn't thought about it before, but that's another slight controversy. And the best thing is that the Roguehouse Robot that happened before, which went against Crackers and Smash, it was Dead Metal who could barely even reach them. Not that Matilda have had any more luck, I suppose, but...
Not with her flywheel, no.
Because the only other time we've seen the flywheel come into play would have been in Heat A, when she chucked nuts out of the arena, but I think that was as much nuts going onto the wheel as the wheel being brought onto nuts.
Well, in terms of in a battle, yeah, but I feel like she also flicked her wheel of someone, didn't she? Quite high.
Oh yeah, the heavy metal wheel was excellent. But when it comes to Crackers and Smash, I can kind of see what's happened there. The weapons weren't working. They've gone in anyway to that fight, and they happen to have won just by luck and a bit of drive power and so on.
So once again, this is a case of what are the rules about needing an active weapon. Clearly, you don't need an active weapon, but I could have sworn in the early one, someone said you did.
Sabretooth would be the example from Heat A. Oh, if that drum doesn't spin up, they're not allowed in. They're going to be replaced. Big drama and tension for telly.
And then, later in this very same series, as you're about to go on to, they made a decision to not even install their weapons to fight Carbide.
The weapons that they had fixed and were working.
Yeah, they then said, we're not going to put them on. They'll just get torn off again, which is true.
They're not wrong.
They're very true. But that is, yeah,
Because we're on iTunes now, I can't say what I want to say. Even with beeping, I don't want to go there, but I have many words that I could say about this. And the worst thing is, they've said about it in an interview before the fight. They've literally gone, yeah, this is what we're doing. We don't want to break them, so we're going in without.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Isn't like they were even trying to hide it. They were proud of that strategy.
A tactical decision that is... It's not in the spirit of the sport, really, is it?
No, it isn't within the rules or the spirit. And then, of course, they've gone into the fight, got smashed around and forfeited.
Has anyone ever been... Has that ever happened before?
I don't think so. I can't think of a time. There may have been an incident where someone drove straight into the pit.
Yeah, I think if you want to forfeit, I feel like you've got to at least... I mean, driving into the pit to take yourself out is a bit lame, but I feel like that's better than, we got smashed around, we were clearly going to lose, so we're just going to forfeit so that we don't take any more damage, which, other robots have been flung into the side of the arena and taken bits of the arena off in the process, and they've carried on as best they could, whereas, these guys have gone... Nope, that's it. We're gonna forfeit, which is very tactical. So we talked earlier about tactical weight distribution, and now there's just lots of sort of almost shady tactics. It's like this is rule bending or breaking tactics. It's not quite right.
It just smacks of... I can't win, so I'm not playing. That's how it feels to me. In the best playground terms possible, that's what it is. We're not going to win, so why try?
Yeah, it's
cowardly. That's what it is. That's the best word I can come out without being rude. It is cowardly. If you don't like getting broken, don't come to Robot Wars. You experienced roboteers. You've built stuff in the past. You've smashed other things up. You've got smashed. It's part of the game. If you don't like it, don't bother.
Yeah, if nothing else, it's like I said, it's not in the spirit of the thing. I agree. If you're going to going to come onto Robot Wars and you're not willing to get broken, then you've come to the wrong place.
I suppose we should take a second to talk about that hit, because it was a great hit.
That was so good, because obviously it's so hard to hit them. But then when Carbide got that hit, because they're so light, he just properly sent that one flying.
What I really love is the little detail of the fact that not only does it hit that side, it gets thrown up and lands almost perfectly on Shunt's scoop and slides back down it.
But it bounces up really high, like so it gets flung into the arena sidewall and then rebounds up. Probably, it must be like as high as some robots get flipped by Apollo or something like that. Like it's in the air for a long time and then lands back down again.
The airtime it gets. Oh,
That's an amazing hit.
it's not often that we get really good onboard shots from the house robots, but that one's great because it's almost like I like to imagine the house robots as sentient beings, of course. It's almost like Shunt kind of wasn't paying attention. Here's that hit to the left, goes, oh, what's going on? Turns left just in time to be hit by the falling robot.
It is very good.
And also, the visible bending in the panel that was knocked off was quite satisfying. Because even with Cherub, we didn't really see that.
It didn't get bent, yeah, but this one, because I think this, whichever one it was that got thrown into it, whichever the little ones, it hit... Smashed right into the centre of that panel, like whereas Cherub kind of wedged under it a little bit, smashed right in the centre and properly dented it. Just a ridiculous amount of power from Carbide.
I really wish that was a thing we were able to focus on. But yeah, that's what you come to Robot Wars for, that kind of smash.
Yeah, it speaks to how well built those little robots are, though, that they did that and then were able to get it working later on for a fight against Apollo.
Well, apparently it was still running in the arena, they just chose not to put it back in.
Oh yeah, and then they were proud of themselves for surviving 3 minutes against Apollo.
Hey, Rusty would have struggled, you know. Rusty was falling apart after the first flip.
I mean, what was Apollo going to do to them at that point?
I suppose they were maybe proud of staying in the arena. Although, given a chance, they would have left the arena voluntarily, apparently. So, oh, look, they've left the door open. Let's go, boys.
Yeah.
I've got riled up again. How has this happened?
Well, because it's controversial and disappointing.
The good news is that we get to finish the episode by talking about almost the exact opposite of that cowardice. And that is the Coyote team. So they've come through with a good robot, you know, one of the 4 best in the heat. They've been unlucky not to win a fight so far.
Yep.
They can't go through, they're up against Carbide. And they've basically said, yeah, go nuts. Smash us up, why not? We're out. And they've consented to that absolute beating. And what we get is a fantastic couple of minutes of destruction out of it.
What we get for me is possibly the best shot of the whole series. Right at the end of that fight, there's a fantastic moment where you've got Coyote centre frame looking so mangled and so beaten up. It's like just a ball of scrap at that point. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's somehow got bent down that sort of mid-line, hasn't it?
It's just so twisted.
I don't even understand how that's happened.
The whole chassis is so twisted at that point. It's impressive.
There's another great shot as well from after the fight where the two teams are together just admiring the damage.
Just laughing about it as well. That's
the spirit, that is. That's what you want to see.
I had a note just after the fight ended saying, did Carbide go too far? And then you get that shot afterwards where they're together and having a laugh about it. So I'm just going to cross that out. Clearly not. They've not gone too far.
But no, the official word is that they agreed. Yeah, go nuts. Finish us off. Why not?
And we're very grateful, Team Coyote. We appreciate your sacrifice.
I believe they have put an entry into Series 10 as well, and I will be behind them if only for that. I don't know why, I really like them as a team, and I think it must be because they're Scottish. I think that's the only reason. I really love Scottish teams. It just happens.
To each their own.
Is it worth even talking about the final? Is there anything to say about this, apart from lots of sparks?
Carbide, well, so there's a couple of things. So there's lots of sparks, which Jonathan Pierce says is the deciding part of that fight, which is like, no, he's just created lots of sparks off the front of Apollo there. That's not, again, I feel like that damage can't be much more than skin deep kind of thing. I don't think he's doing any damage to the internals with that. I mean, he's probably welding the flipper down, but he's not damaging the robot particularly, I wouldn't have thought. Maybe I'm wrong. But the other surprising thing here is the restraint from Carbide at the end.
Really?
Because Apollo is immobilized, like not moving, and then it looks like Carbide is lining itself up to get like a full shot from the side. Like he's spinning that thing up, and it looks like he's about to drive into it, and then doesn't. Just waits for it to get counted out, and then cease is called, and he just and that's sort of it.
Interesting how they do unequivocally go in for the late hit. early in the heat.
Yeah.
But at this point, they're sort of, now's not the time.
It's just really shocking restraint. I was fully expecting them to go in and just turn Carbide into Coyote, but they didn't, which is surprising to me. Maybe there must have not have been that same gentleman's agreement.
I don't know how the Apollo team really feel about Carbide. I don't know how much of the sort of rivalry is for show, or if they actually are annoyed about the late hits they've taken off of them.
I think they are annoyed about it, and I think they big it up for show. I think
That's a fairly reasonable assumption, actually.
I think deep down they are annoyed by it and don't like that tactic, but they can't express that without seeming a bit petty and mean, so they big it up and make it seem like a bit of a joke on television.
And on Twitter.
And on Twitter.
For today's rating system, you may now open your PDF.
I'm so excited.
This has become sort of a ritual. It's like opening up the golden envelope at an award ceremony. For today's rating...
So let me get the thing open. Episode 5 ratings. Okay.
Today I have compiled a list of groundbreaking robots. Robots that were the first to do a specific thing.
Can I just ask, is Shockwave, is that groundbreaking? Is that not on this list?
No.
Oh, you've let me down, man. You've let me down.
As always, you don't have to stick to the list. You can add your own. So if that's something you feel you need to do when you've gone through the list, that's fine by me.
So shall I go down this list and read them out, or do you...
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so up first is it Recyclops?
Recyclops?
The first active flipping weapon, and the first to flip a house robot in Series 1. Which one of the two robots in this picture is Recyclops? I mean, I want to say it's the dome-shaped thing because it's got one eye.
It's the one that isn't Roadblock, which I assumed you would recognise.
Oh, and the wedge thing. Well, because you say first active flipping weapon, I'd expect the wedge-shaped robot to be the one with the flipper.
No. The sticky outy tongue and a front hinge flipper on it.
Oh, fair enough. That's Recyclops.
Which a lot of people seem to miss, because it was never really shown off, but it did actually flip Matilda in the second round, the trial, which was the kind of British Bulldog thing they did that didn't really work.
Got Razor, the first crushing weapon. Just the picture of Razor is a screenshot of your desktop.
Yeah, what happened is OpenOffice is awful.
But, like, you can't, like, right-click Save As?
I could, but that takes longer, and I was doing this on a time limit. Leave me alone!
I just want to just pause and just look at Razor, because it's such a beautiful robot. Right, moving on.
I think the more interesting thing here is that I thought you needed to see a picture of Razor to be reminded which one it was.
Oh, I know Razor. We have Tracy, first invertible robot. Oh, look at that design as well. So it's got, like, two... I've never seen this robot before. It's got two-wheel drive, like, right in the centre, and then casters on the front and back. That, by the way...
And then big spikes, because that's what Series 1 was all about.
Just to go back quickly to an earlier episode, that arrangement of wheels is an arrangement that you can use Omni wheels for.
Oh, okay.
So you'd have the ones where the Omni wheels, the rollers are completely at 90 degrees. So you'd have them in the position where the two drive wheels are, and then instead of the casters, you'd have two more of the Omni wheels at the front and back in that orientation.
If only the Tracy team had known.
If only. Cassius, first self-writing robot. Nothing exciting to say about that one, I'm afraid. Jim Struts, the first walk. Oh, look at that. It's like a shuffling thing, isn't it? That is a very similar walking system, by the way, to my walking robot that I built when I was younger.
It's basically a washing machine on legs. It's terrible.
Yeah, but, you know, Hypnodisc, that's flywheel weapon. Mortis, the first over-engineered robot. First one with tracks is what the serious thing is here. Interesting. I love it. It's got like a dual weapon as well. I like the fact that it's got the rubbish axe and then a slightly less rubbish lifter.
That Mortis axe wasn't actually that bad in later series. In Series 1, none of the weapons were good, so it didn't matter.
Then Gemini, first cluster bot. I like Gemini. Okay, I've looked at them all.
What is the verdict?
So you want me to liken this episode to one of these robots?
Or one of your own choosing. It's a tricky one, this one, isn't it?
It's really hard. What I want is a robot that's really hyped up, but ultimately very disappointing.
That'd be Mortis then. They were going in, bragging about how it's made of composite materials, it was the most technologically advanced, it was the most expensive, and then it just stopped working at one point, I seem to recall.
I think Mortis is the one, because like Gemini was effective in its own way. Hypnodisc is very, very famous and very effective, like a, you know, it's still defining the sport. So there's that. Jim Struts, I can't imagine that was ever really hyped up that much. So
let's go with no on that one.
I mean, and then Razor. It's very hard for that robot to disappoint me unless he gets dragged into the pit by Kitty Cranky of all things.
A weaponized tube.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Mortis. I'm not even going to go with my really punny entry with Shockwave because that was actually impressive. So Mortis it is, as hyped up but disappointing.
It's a shame because we could have had Will Thomas win 2 rating systems in a row, both for joke reasons.
We could have done, but not quite.
So you're going with Mortis.
I'm going with Mortis. What's your pick?
I feel the need, as much as I've been angry about it, to kind of honour the pacifist approach that Crackers and Smash have by going with Cassius. Because Cassius and Rex Garrett in general was renowned for being a robot that didn't want the opponent to get hurt. They would go in, if a robot was immobilized and the house robots were attacking it, it would go in and defend them. So it's kind of it's comparable and yet opposite to Crackers and Smash. It doesn't like violence. Anti-violence. Get out of there.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
The episode has been rated.
So I think then it is time to sit back, lean back into your armchair and start discussing some engineering.
You're getting confident now on these links. I love it. Grab a drink, grab a pipe, maybe some biscuits. Time to engineer. And unless, of course, you built jellyfish, then you're not allowed to engineer.
I encourage them to learn engineering. I think they'll build a better robot as a result.
So today's topic, we want to start talking about armour, because it is basically the only thing left that we haven't spoken about already. Now, I don't know about you. In a sense, I don't want to get too bogged down in the materials, because the way I see it, there's only one option in materials at the moment.
What choice is that?
Everyone's going in the direction of Hardox.
But is that the right choice?
Tell me why it's wrong.
I'm not saying it's wrong. It's not what I'd do.
Really?
Yeah.
You actually have an alternative approach. Okay.
I would do something much more similar to Terahertz, which I know does use Hardox, but it's not entirely Hardox. I would...
Yes. You're kind of thinking in the same way as me then.
Yeah, so like I think I would use a bit of Hardox, just because it's obviously a very effective armour, but I would do a much more composite approach to having this, of areas that can bend and be repaired easily, but also areas that are good for absorbing attacks from the carbides of the world.
So the thing I love about Terahertz and Beta as well, because it uses basically the same design just with a different weapon system,
Beta's flatter as well.
is that it's true, yes, which is to do with the different weapon system, I think. The thing they both do really well is they rely on the driving. They're basically saying, well, it's John Reed saying, I trust myself as a driver to keep the correct part of my robot pointed at the opponent. Therefore, I will invest weight into armour there, and I will keep everything as light as possible so that I'm putting more into the weaponry, the drive, and so on. That, to me, is the optimal approach for BattleBots. The one difficulty you've got in Robot Wars is you've got the melee to get through, where you've got 3 opponents, so you can't necessarily turn and face. So that's the one thing that I think holds back that approach, because I do think that it's kind of a min-maxing approach, isn't it? Which I think is usually the best approach to doing things if you're good enough at it.
So I think the approach I would take is probably a bit less reliant on my driving skills. So real like speculation here. So 2 things about the kind of armor I want to do. I would want to have it effectively shock mounted, so I'd have it not directly attached to the chassis, so that the whole shell can move slightly independently of the chassis to help absorb some of the impact. I'd also be really curious to know other approaches to sort of linking together these high impact plastics and the Hardox and stuff like that. Instead of having mostly what's the rest of Terahertz's armor? It's Hardox and
I think it's specifically Lexan, which is the stuff that the outside, the windows sort of the arena is made of.
So I think it'd be interesting to sort of, instead of having basically 2 sections of armor, one of this Lexan stuff and one of Hardox, be interesting to sort of see what more complicated arrangements could you do. Could you have layers of these things? Could you almost have like a weird version of chainmail that's like lots of little plates of Hardox linked together with this plastic stuff? I don't know if that would work, if that would be weaker or stronger or what.
We're also talking about being weak or strong, but you've got to consider the different weapon types that you're coming up against as well. So for the most part, we're really thinking about impact resistance, aren't we? From big spinners, hammers, axes. Because there aren't really any other weapon types we need to worry about. We're not really getting any crushers or any cutters. We're not really seeing abrasion being used at all. It's all about being able to take a big hard hit.
I mean, even if you're going to go with, even if someone did do abrasion, Hardox is a very good armour for that as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's designed for being resistant to abrasiveness.
It's literally wear plate.
Yeah, it's designed
not to wear.
Yeah, it's designed for that. It's not really designed quite so much for impact, but yeah, lots of different strengths here. I think if I did my kind of like plate armor all linked together with high impact plastics and stuff, I think it would be much more susceptible to axe blows and crushing robots and stuff. But like I see, we don't see many of them anymore, so that's a trade off worth making. If that kind of armor would work, maybe maybe that would be completely ineffective and it would effectively shatter as soon as Carbide hit it. Who knows?
I always worry that the more complexity you add, the more problems you're giving yourself.
Yeah, it's a danger with everything. Don't be clever. It's number one rule in software development is don't be clever.
Never innovate, remember.
Stick with old, boring techniques.
Let someone else make the mistake so that it can become accepted practice by the time you start doing it. For me, the big argument with armour is just as much about how you're using it as what you're using. So a very thick Armox box is going to struggle against big spinners because of the bite points. Whereas if you can put together a good, smooth wedge, you're less reliant on the properties of the material because you're using the properties of the shape to deflect blows. And that's why I think we see a lot of the flippers doing quite well, because the shape you make a flipper in naturally gives you those angles to deflect those blows. And that, I think, is the main reason that Apollo was able to beat Carbide in the final last series.
Yeah, and
it just deflected enough blows, and by deflecting those blows, it was tipping Carbide up, so it was hitting the solid object of the floor of the wall or whatever, which eventually broke the weapon.
Yeah, I mean, it shows even though they didn't win in this episode, they took a lot of hits from Carbide very effectively again, simply because Carbide can't very easily get a good bite on.
And even then, it's not really optimized for that, because it's got quite a few sort of, not corners as such on it, but there are some bite points there. What I really love on Terahertz is that front shield, it's bent rather than welded. It is a single piece that has been sort of folded, which means there is almost no bite point whatsoever. And Terahertz, again, is one of the robots that managed to beat Carbide last series. And we've seen it up against things like, we've seen Beta up against things like Tombstone as well, doing quite well, until it managed to ride up and actually hit the weapon mounting and completely broke it.
Yeah. It is a very effective design for armour. It's very good.
So I'm wondering, as difficult as this would be, if something like a dome shape would, technically speaking, be the most optimised design for spinnerproofing. Because you've got almost no bite points.
I think it also depends on how much reach the spinner has.
Why would that make a large difference to that?
I'm just sort of trying to justify that statement now. Maybe I'm wrong.
Let's say you went in with a dome shape, and I'm specifically thinking, and I hope this is the right term, a sort of truncated dome shape. So instead of being a proper hemisphere, you kind of take the top section of that, so that where you meet the ground, you're coming in at a more sort of shallow angle. I'm not using good mathematical vocabulary here, but I'm going to go with it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So yeah, not across the centre of a sphere, but up a bit.
Less hitty and more deflecty is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think that I see what you're getting at now. Much more like a UFO shape.
Yeah, because at that point, at that point you want to be hit as high as possible. So the things that are going to do the most damage would be the lowest weapons. Something like a PP3D is going to get the best bite of anything. And if you can keep that ground clearance low, you're also okay against verticals. Because again, we saw Terahertz we're using as an example here a lot, which is to its credit. We saw that against horizontals in Series 8 and verticals in Series 9. And it did well against all of them until its ground clearance was messed up.
Yeah, I think you might be right about using a dome shape for that. My question about that is, what do you do in terms of a weapon with a dome-shaped robot?
You don't. You crackers and smash it, it's fine. You don't need weapons.
Have a token weapon that you never put on.
Well, the obvious answer to that is you make it a full-body spinner.
Because that introduces all its own problems, doesn't it? About how do you securely mount that armour at that point?
Well, it is the weapon at that point, but then it's not really armour at all. It is more weapons, so it's kind of defeating the object of the conversation.
It's armament.
Oh. You have, over the course of only 5 episodes, already discovered some of the most efficient ways to annoy me. Say armament and do the spinner voice a lot. That's basically all it needs.
Look, that spinner voice is funny, okay? It's really, really funny.
Oh, no. I'm laughing, but only because it's better than crying.
Crying on the wrong side of your face. Now, there's a reference. What do you think about, like, shock mounting armour then? Because we saw someone in this series, I forget who now, that apparently had their armour mounted in such a way that it wasn't directly attached to their chassis, which very quickly got pulled off. But in terms of, if you could have your perfect dome of Hardox, would you have that directly welded to your chassis, or would you have some kind of rubber mounting, or even like full-on shock absorbers? Like, what kind of thing do you think would be effective there?
So we've had Cranky back in Heat A, which they didn't mention it, but it looked like it was rubber-mounted armour on the front, which promptly got destroyed by Aftershock, so that was super effective. Well done, guys. And then we had High Five as well, which had shock-mounted armour that was brittle, which kind of defeats the object as well. I honestly don't know if it's worth the hassle.
I find it really funny that you praise robots for innovating and trying things, and yet you seem surprisingly unwilling to try these things yourself.
That's because I have no skills.
I know, but like even hypothetically, you're sort of like, is it worth the hassle to do that? Like, I feel like you'd build a very conservative robot. I think like you'd build a robot much more like me than I thought you would.
I'd build something that's obviously stupid. That's the thing. For me, with the shock mounting, I don't know what the opportunity cost is. Especially if you talk about using things like shock absorbers. At that point, we're reaching a level of complexity that I don't think is helpful.
Yeah, that's probably a bit far. That's definitely over-engineering. But
if I were doing it with a more boxy design, I think at that point it makes sense to do it. But if I've already got my complicated dome shape, I feel like I've done enough in that area. And I'm already using the shape to minimise the amount of force and vibration that's going to be transferred through to the chassis, through to the electronics and so on. I think if you're going to shock mount things, I think it makes more sense to do that with individual components than it does the armour. Especially if you've got a spinner where you're worried about, for example, the forces as your robot is turned around by your own impacts and what that's going to do to the wheels and the motors, for example.
Yeah, that's a good shout. Have everything inside the thing floating.
But again, that sounds like you're introducing a lot of problems for yourself in terms of tolerances.
Yeah, I mean, you're being clever, and that so often ends in disaster. So
being clever is for clever people only. I'm not a clever enough person.
I'd love to hear what someone who's actually built a robot thinks of this.
Yeah, absolutely, because we are, as we've said, we are probably the least qualified people doing a Robot Wars podcast. I think we are reaching a point in Robot Wars in particular. I think we reached this point in BattleBots a long time ago where simplicity is becoming less and less viable. We're reaching a point where expertise is becoming required. So for those people, doing the complex stuff makes sense. And where it's becoming a more competitive environment with more very good machines there, those small touches are going to matter more and more. Whereas if we'd been having this conversation back in Series 4 or 5, I'd be saying keep it as simple as possible. But unfortunately, I think we really are past that point where you can make something competition winning in an ordinary garage. We are now at the level of workshops. We are looking at, sending things off to be laser cut or water cut. We're looking at CNC machines and hydraulic presses and all of that stuff up there that is hard to get access to. So if I wanted to do my dome shape, that would have to be pressed into shape. That's not an easy thing to get arranged.
How would you do that? You could water form that. What you can do is you can get like 2 sheets of metal and you can weld them together and then fill it up with water because water doesn't compress. It's actually quite easy to get enough pressure in there to bend metal into the shape you want. And if you did it right, it would quite naturally form the kind of dome you want.
I feel like there's probably a limitation on the thickness of material you can do that with.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work.
But if you just did it twice and layered them, I suppose that's kind of doing the same thing, isn't it? Maybe it's more possible than I'm making it sound.
I mean, I've seen people do it quite effectively with stainless steel. I don't know how. I mean, presumably Hardox is much harder than that, so I don't know.
That's kind of the point.
I don't know how plausible that is with something like Hardox, but
just to check, are we both talking about the same Colin Furze video here? Is that what's happening? Because I've only seen one person do it, but it was a clever person, so I trust it.
I'll put a link to that Colin Furze video in there to see forming metal with a pressure washer. But I've seen a few other videos of people doing it as well.
But no, it's a good way of doing it. Maybe I'm assuming it's more complex than it is. Because for things like titanium, I know that's really hard to shape and form. The big scoop on Behemoth, I think that took something like I'm just be pulling numbers up my backside. I want to say a 20-ton press. But now I think about it, I don't know if that's actually a lot or not. It sounds like a lot.
I haven't watched enough of those hydraulic press videos on YouTube to know.
Sam, what would someone do if they wanted to get hold of us?
You can follow us on Twitter at Spinnerproof and tweet us at Spinnerproof, obviously.
That's how Twitter works.
That is how Twitter works. One Twitter handle for following and the same one again for replying.